The moment everyone at the dinner table stared at us, I realized something had gone terribly wrong. What was supposed to be a harmless favor had somehow turned into a scene that left an entire room speechless. My roommate's hand tightened around my arm. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. My relatives looked shocked. Even my aunt, who never ran out of things to say, sat frozen with her mouth slightly open. And the strangest part? My roommate wasn't acting anymore. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and unexpected love stories, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who loves emotional stories, and subscribe to Ancient Truth for more heartfelt journeys that remind us how powerful human connection can be. My name was Corbin Hale, and for most of my adult life, I had become comfortable being alone. At 36, I lived a quiet life. I worked remotely as an architectural designer, spent most evenings buried in project files, and rarely attended family gatherings unless absolutely necessary. My previous relationship had ended 3 years earlier after a painful engagement collapse that left me cautious about trusting anyone again. That was how I ended up sharing an apartment with Rowan Mercer. Rowan wasn't supposed to become important. She was simply the new tenant who answered an online listing when my previous roommate moved out. She was 29, worked as a pediatric nurse, paid rent on time, respected boundaries, and somehow managed to make every room brighter without even trying. For nearly a year, we lived together peacefully. We weren't romantically involved. We weren't secretly dating. We were simply two people helping each other survive expensive city rent. At least, that was what I believed. Everything changed when my mother announced a family dinner. The invitation itself wasn't unusual. The problem was that my family never stopped asking questions. Every gathering became an interrogation about why I was still single. Why I hadn't settled down. Why I hadn't started a family. Why I couldn't move on from my failed engagement. The pressure exhausted me. A week before the dinner, my mother called and informed me that several relatives would be attending, including cousins I hadn't seen in years. She also casually mentioned that everyone was excited to finally meet the woman in my life. There was only one problem. There wasn't a woman in my life. Apparently one of my relatives had seen Rowan and me shopping together and assumed she was my girlfriend. The rumor spread faster than wildfire. Before I could correct anyone, my family had convinced themselves I was secretly dating. I considered skipping the dinner entirely. Instead, Rowan surprised me. She listened quietly while I complained in the kitchen. Then she offered a solution. She would pretend to be my wife for one dinner. Just one evening. Nothing complicated. No emotional investment. No expectations. Just enough to survive my family's questions. I laughed at the absurdity of it. Then I agreed. The plan seemed harmless. The night of the dinner arrived. Rowan wore a deep red dress that transformed her completely. I had never seen her outside hospital scrubs or casual clothes. For a few seconds, standing in our apartment doorway, I barely recognized her. She looked elegant. Confident. Beautiful. And suddenly I became aware of something I had spent an entire year ignoring. The drive to my parents' house felt strangely tense. We reviewed fake details. How long we had supposedly been married. Where we had met. What our imaginary future plans were. We laughed about it. Everything felt easy. Until we walked through the front door. My family welcomed Rowan instantly. My mother hugged her. My cousins adored her. My grandmother practically adopted her within minutes. What surprised me wasn't Rowan's ability to act. It was how naturally she fit into my life. She remembered details about everyone. She listened attentively. She laughed at old family stories. She treated every person in the room with genuine kindness. Hours passed. The fake marriage story worked perfectly. Then dinner happened. That was when everything changed. As conversations flowed around the table, one of my uncles asked Rowan how she managed living with someone as stubborn as me. Everyone laughed. The answer should have been simple. Instead, Rowan looked at me. Not the way an actress looks at a scene partner. Not the way a friend looks at another friend. She looked at me with warmth. With affection. With something deeper. The room seemed quieter. Then she began describing me. She talked about the way I checked on neighbors during storms. The way I quietly donated money without telling anyone. The way I spent weekends helping elderly residents fix things around the apartment building. The way I never expected recognition for anything. As she spoke, I realized something unsettling. She had noticed things about me that nobody else had. Even I had forgotten some of them. The room grew silent. Several relatives looked emotional. My mother wiped away tears. I sat there unable to speak. Because for the first time in years, someone was describing the best parts of me. Not the failures. Not the mistakes. Not the broken engagement. The best parts. Then came the moment frozen forever in my memory. Rowan reached for my arm. Her fingers wrapped around it gently. She leaned closer. Her eyes softened. And suddenly everyone around us looked shocked. Because nothing about her expression seemed fake anymore. The picture of that moment would later become a family legend. A room full of stunned relatives. A confused man. And a woman who appeared completely unable to hide her feelings. I didn't understand it then. But I would soon. The dinner eventually ended. I expected relief. Instead, the drive home felt different. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy. Meaningful. As if both of us sensed something had shifted. Over the following weeks, the pretending should have ended. That was the agreement. The performance was over. Except Rowan refused to stop. Not in an obvious way. Not through dramatic confessions. Not through grand gestures. She simply continued acting like she cared. When my workload became overwhelming, she left meals outside my office door. When I caught the flu, she stayed awake checking my temperature. When she worked exhausting hospital shifts, I found myself waiting up to make sure she got home safely. Neither of us discussed it. Yet something was growing between us. Something neither friendship nor convenience could explain. Then life delivered a challenge neither of us expected. My father suffered a serious heart attack. Everything happened quickly. Hospital visits. Emergency procedures. Uncertainty. Fear. For weeks my family lived in survival mode. Through it all, Rowan remained beside me. She took time off work. Helped my mother. Managed practical details nobody else remembered. Sat beside me during endless nights in hospital waiting rooms. I watched her comfort my frightened grandmother. I watched her reassure my younger cousins. I watched her carry burdens that weren't hers. And slowly a realization settled into my heart. Nobody was pretending anymore. One evening after visiting my father, I returned home emotionally exhausted. I sat alone in the living room staring at nothing. The fear of losing him felt unbearable. Without a word, Rowan sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then she simply rested her head against my shoulder. That small gesture broke something inside me. Not in a painful way. In a healing way. Because for years I had carried everything alone. The failed engagement. The disappointment. The loneliness. The fear. And suddenly I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. My father eventually recovered. The crisis passed. Life stabilized. But my feelings didn't. The more time passed, the harder it became to ignore what had happened. The woman who was supposed to be my roommate had become the person I trusted most. The person I wanted to tell everything. The person whose happiness mattered to me. Unfortunately, fear still controlled me. I worried about ruining our friendship. Ruining our home. Ruining the best relationship either of us had ever experienced. So I stayed silent. And that silence nearly cost me everything. Several months later, Rowan received an incredible job offer from another city. A prestigious children's hospital wanted her. The opportunity could transform her career. When she told me, I congratulated her. I smiled. I said all the right things. But inside, something shattered. For days I avoided thinking about it. Then I noticed boxes appearing in her room. Packing supplies. Moving plans. Reality. The thought of coming home to an empty apartment suddenly felt unbearable. One night I found myself sitting alone at the same dining table where we shared countless meals. I looked around the apartment. Every corner held memories. Every room carried traces of her presence. And finally I admitted the truth. I loved her. Not because she pretended to be my wife. Not because she helped my family. Not because she rescued me from loneliness. I loved her because she saw me completely and stayed anyway. The realization arrived almost too late. 2 days before her scheduled move, I came home to find most of her belongings packed. Panic overwhelmed me. For the first time in years, I stopped overthinking. I stopped hiding. I stopped protecting myself. Instead, I told the truth. I told her how much she meant to me. How every day had become brighter because of her. How that ridiculous fake dinner changed my life. How somewhere between pretending and reality, she became the most important person in my world. Tears filled her eyes. And then I learned something that changed everything. She had fallen in love with me months earlier. Long before the hospital. Long before the job offer. Maybe even before the dinner itself. She admitted that pretending to be my wife had been far easier than pretending she didn't care. The reason she refused to stop wasn't because she enjoyed the joke. It was because her feelings had become real. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Years of loneliness. Months of uncertainty. All collapsing into a single beautiful truth. Sometimes the person meant for you isn't waiting somewhere far away. Sometimes they're already sitting across the kitchen table every morning. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to Ancient Truth, and share your thoughts below. Stories like these survive because of viewers who believe that love can still be genuine, patient, and worth waiting for. Special request * comment below, * the right person sees your heart before anyone else does. * Rowan never moved away. Instead, she accepted a position at a nearby hospital. A year later, my family gathered once again around another dinner table. The atmosphere felt familiar. Warm lights glowed softly. Relatives laughed. Memories filled the room. But this time there was one important difference. Nobody was pretending. The woman sitting beside me wasn't my fake wife anymore. She was my real one. And whenever someone asked how our story began, everyone laughed at the same answer. It all started with one dinner. One harmless lie. And one roommate who refused to stop loving me. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't begin with destiny, grand romance, or perfect timing. Sometimes they begin with kindness. With friendship. With two ordinary people sharing an apartment and slowly becoming each other's home. And in a world where so many people are searching for someone who truly sees them, perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. The following Sunday, my mother invited us to lunch. This time, nobody asked Rowan whether she was my wife. Nobody needed to. The way she smiled when she looked at me answered every question before it was asked. Yet despite finally being together, our story wasn't finished. Real love rarely ends when two people confess their feelings. That is usually where the real challenges begin. For the first few months, everything felt almost unreal. After spending so much time hiding our emotions, simply holding hands in public felt strange. Waking up and knowing we no longer had to pretend felt even stranger. The apartment that had once belonged to two roommates slowly transformed into something else. A home. Not because we bought expensive furniture or redecorated. Because every room became filled with shared memories. Saturday breakfasts. Late-night conversations. Movie nights that usually ended with both of us falling asleep on the couch. Tiny ordinary moments that somehow became the most valuable parts of our lives. For the first time in years, I found myself imagining a future again. Not a perfect future. Just a real one. And that terrified me. Because losing Rowan would hurt far more than losing anyone before her. The closer we became, the more vulnerable I felt. Old fears resurfaced. The memories of my broken engagement. The fear of disappointing someone. The fear of not being enough. Sometimes I withdrew without realizing it. Sometimes I buried myself in work. Sometimes I became quiet when something bothered me. Rowan noticed every time. She always noticed. One rainy evening she found me sitting alone on the balcony, staring at the city lights. The project I had spent months designing had been rejected. The criticism felt personal. I hadn't told anyone. Not even her. But somehow she knew. She sat beside me without speaking. The rain tapped softly against the railing. The city glowed beneath the storm clouds. And for several minutes, neither of us said anything. That silence reminded me of the hospital waiting room months earlier. The same comfort. The same understanding. The same feeling that I didn't need to carry everything by myself. That night I finally told her about every fear I still carried. The failed engagement. The insecurities. The belief that eventually everyone leaves. She listened carefully. Then she reminded me of something simple. People don't stay because someone is perfect. They stay because someone is worth staying for. That sentence remained with me long after the conversation ended. Months passed. My father regained his health. My mother returned to her energetic self. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Then another surprise arrived. During Thanksgiving dinner, my grandmother stood and tapped her glass for attention. Everyone looked toward her. She smiled mischievously. Then she announced that she wanted to make a confession. The entire room laughed. Grandma loved dramatic speeches. She pointed directly at Rowan and me. Then she admitted that she had known the truth during that very first fake wife dinner. The room exploded with confusion. Apparently, she had noticed the way Rowan watched me when I wasn't looking. She had noticed how I instinctively moved closer whenever Rowan entered a room. She had noticed dozens of tiny details neither of us realized were visible. According to her, the only people fooled by the fake marriage were Rowan and me. Everyone else had seen the truth months before we did. The entire family burst into laughter. Even Rowan couldn't stop laughing. For years I had believed love required certainty. Perfect timing. A clear sign. Some dramatic moment. Instead, it turned out everyone around us had seen what we were too afraid to admit. That evening became one of my favorite memories. Not because it was funny. Because it reminded me how obvious genuine affection becomes when it's real. The following spring, Rowan received another offer. This one wasn't from another city. It was a promotion. A major opportunity. The position would require longer hours and more responsibility. Many people would have hesitated. Rowan almost declined immediately. She worried about how it would affect us. That was when I realized how much we had both changed. A year earlier, I would have quietly sacrificed my own feelings. Now I encouraged her to chase the opportunity. Because loving someone means wanting their dreams to grow, not shrink. She accepted. The following months were difficult. Long shifts. Late nights. Exhaustion. Stress. Yet somehow our relationship grew stronger. Not because everything became easier. Because we learned how to face difficulties together. One night after another exhausting week, Rowan fell asleep on the couch while reading. I covered her with a blanket and sat nearby. For a long time I simply watched her. The woman who entered my life as a stranger. The woman who became my roommate. The woman who pretended to be my wife for one dinner. The woman who refused to stop caring. The woman who taught me that love often arrives quietly. Not through fireworks. Not through destiny. Through consistency. Through kindness. Through choosing the same person again and again. That was the moment I knew. I didn't just want Rowan in my future. I wanted every future with her. Several weeks later, I proposed. Not at a fancy restaurant. Not during a grand public event. Not with photographers hiding nearby. I proposed in our apartment. The same apartment where everything began. The same kitchen where we first shared coffee. The same living room where we survived difficult nights. The same home where friendship slowly became love. She cried before I even finished speaking. Then she said yes. The wedding happened the following year. Small. Personal. Filled with laughter. Filled with family. Filled with people who had witnessed our entire journey. My grandmother spent half the ceremony proudly telling strangers she had predicted everything first. My father cried openly. My mother cried even more. And when Rowan walked toward me, I remembered that first dinner. The red dress. The stunned relatives. The way she held my arm. The look in her eyes. The moment everyone realized something neither of us understood yet. Years later, people still ask how we met. Some expect an exciting story. Some expect romance. Instead, I always tell the truth. The best thing that ever happened to me began with a rent payment. A spare bedroom. And a roommate. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Stories like these remind us that sometimes the greatest blessings enter our lives quietly, disguised as ordinary people and ordinary moments. Special request * comment below, real love begins when pretending ends. Today, whenever I look across the dinner table and see Rowan smiling at me, I think about how close we came to missing each other. How fear almost won. How silence almost separated us. How one simple act of kindness changed everything. A fake wife for one dinner. A real wife for a lifetime. And in the end, that was the only ending either of us ever wanted. The end.